Okay, hi, welcome everybody. It's so good to see you all. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and introduce to you, as I'm sure many of you know, Joanne here, Joanne Hynes, and we're here celebrating the opening of her incredible show, What We Carry With Us. So Joanne graduated from Central St Martin's back in 2001 and established her own label in 2003 and has a long-standing exclusive collection with Dunn's Island. She, kind of her practices, as this exhibition shows, and we'll be talking about a little bit, is at the intersection of various disciplines, kind of different methods of process, a fashion designer, a creative practitioner, a writer, as we can see from the text and all kind of different objects and items here. I'm Rebecca Bell, and I am a writer, researcher, lecturer, painter. And my background is kind of looking at things like craft methodologies, embodied practices, and intersections between art, craft, and design. So I am thrilled to have been involved in this project and kind of had some conversations with Joanne from over the last few months and have been here for the installing and some of the construction. Yeah.
We've had a lot of conversations.
Yeah, we
have. All went in different directions.
Yeah.
And then I'm sitting here with my notes. I'm thinking they're going to be redundant in a minute.
We've both got
There's a lot of notes here.
Yeah, we
so
both
I should just amputate these and forget about it and try and relax. So thanks to everybody for coming.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I'm going to start with a little bit of your text.
Okay.
So, what did I do? I concocted a plan of sorts. It was my first London winter in 1999. My eyes could see things. I could start a dialogue with clothes. What was it I should not do with them? And what is it that makes me Irish? And does this matter? In this show, you're revisiting your design practice, 25 years of kind of design story. Yeah. And your kind of ongoing dialogue with clothes, objects, writing, and self. And you've said that writing and fashion, which are the kind of crux of this exhibition, have a shared quality of unformedness and of flux, which I think are fascinating terms. Could you tell us a little bit more about those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, the writing, it's kind of, even hearing you saying it, I'm kind of sitting in the chair moving a bit, but it's something that I've, I suppose, done privately for a long time. And then my attention was is obviously on fashion. But they're similar in the sense that I found myself why does anybody make anything? I don't know. Do we ever know the answer to that? What it does, it's a comforting thing. But there was direct kind of connection between the process of writing, let's just say, and the being in that moment, and then obviously the act of making, whether any kind of gestural making, whether it's painting or any kind of craft, anything like that. So I just found with writing that I didn't have to ask anybody to do anything for me. I didn't have to convince anybody to do anything. It was a solitary thing. But as the more and more I did it, and I wasn't really interested in story or narrative structure or any. I didn't want any discipline. I just wanted stream of consciousness kind of flow. A bit like maybe designing something or putting something together, like in that sense. And I just found with words that I've kind of fallen in love with the language again, and I feel like I've revisited that. So that's been lovely, and just the idea that. With words, that the idea of playing with syntax and just putting words together, the weight of them, how they bounce off each other, all of that. And it was it is a very unknown kind of moving furniture in the dark space, which is very much like doing anything creative, really. I think for anybody doing anything creative, I don't think we're really aware that. When you start off in art college or whatever it is, you're just not aware that really we don't know what we're doing here. Like nobody really knows what they want. And when I went to St. Martin's meeting Louise Wilson, I find her voice in my head. She's there. One of the first things she said was, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want. And I was just hanging on to her words, and I'm still carrying them. So I feel like the title of the show was originally And the title always comes last. I mean, let's just face it. It's like it wraps it up, but you never really know what it is. I mean, what is it? But it was Watch Me Unravel. But I didn't want to use the me because I meant the me as the plural, as us, people, women, objects. The unraveling, obviously metaphorically the unraveling in the making and the being and the spending time with objects. But then it just changed into what we carry with us. And I think that, I would like to think, well, I ended up having a dialogue with a lot of I kind of went out kind of hunting, as I call it. I've done it all my life, just looking, like ferociously looking for objects. It's the thing that kind of feeds the practice of making. So I end up, if I'm in a place or if I go to London, I will end up in that vintage shop, looking. And so I brought some of the most decrepit, kind of least wanted, damaged dresses that I could find, brought them home. And at this stage, I had decided that I wanted to make work that was maybe just slightly different in direction to the collection that I do with Duns, which is, that in itself it's a great thing to do. But I also wanted something that felt like there was another layer peeled off. It was a bit more innately personal, let's just say, because fashion's more of a shared thing, and you're always thinking about the person you're designing for. But with this, when I brought the garments home, I found myself living with them and spending time and writing. I just couldn't. It was just an action. It was like, the pencil, writing and imagining maybe the lives of the people that wore them, and having that dialogue with objects and with the clothes.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of all do that in a weird way. And for me, it's become a bit of a muscle now, and I'm getting more comfortable with sharing it. And I suppose tonight was, the idea that I would kind of put some of the past behind, in a sense. The kind of pathway of getting here, it has been, I probably have underestimated that it has been 25 years of, being really committed. And I looked back at, some of the archive pieces, and the names are on them here. This is from 2008, and I called it Messy Dress, Messy Stuff. It's from a piece that I wrote about self, women, life, humanity, messy dress, messy stuff. The piece, it's part of the extract is there. And some of the titles are kind of giving kind of an insight into some of the writings. It's not a literal kind of marriage of the writing and the archive pieces, but they are. There's a kind of a thread.
Conversation.
Yeah. So they're. It was emotional because that dress, and actually it was worn by Julie Feeney, who is here right now, my good friend Julie Feeney. I ended up chopping it up and kind of deconstructing it, and the same with the black, just behind you, and the white from 2008. So they're kind of, in a sense now, they're gone. They're like, I've said goodbye, goodbye to them. Yeah.
But in the kind of, there's this interesting thing. I love some of the phrases you've said. They're like, ferociously looking, this process of kind of examining and exploring and kind of pulling things out. Yeah. And that's definitely something which is, you use the word muscle, and you've said this is a kind of muscle that you use, the muscle you use for writing and for designing and constructing and deconstructing. It's a kind of similar muscle. But this idea of chopping up, and we've got lots of garments here which have been chopped up, remade. You've got relics of and kind of replicas of
somebody else's
garments.
Object, somebody else's design, somebody else's life. So that's how it feels to me, because in the sense of it being something embodied, and that somebody made this, somebody worked on this, somebody thought about this, lived with this. So that was just my connection with it, and the replicas. In a sense, and I work very closely with David, who's here in the room, David Poole, and we've had lots of ongoing conversations about this, but the centre of the room is really about the idea of influx, being in flux. Yeah. So a lot of these garments, they might look unformed and kind of unpolished, but there's a real beauty in that for me, because it brings me back to my earlier design references from being in the college in Limerick in 1997, 96, looking at Marta Margiela and all these avant-garde designers that made, clothes with raw edges, and it blew my mind, So I was able to, I kind of carried that aesthetic with me even though I haven't always followed it through in a lot of the collections, because it can be kind of difficult sometimes for people, you know. So the idea of the unpolished, the unformedness relates also to language and what can be done with language.
Yes.
And just the beauty of that. And just, you know, I was here yesterday and I was looking at a dress. I was saying to you, Rebecca, that there was a loose thread on one of the dresses, and I was looking at it going, do I cut that thread?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a first world problem, really, but do I cut that thread? No, I don't cut that thread.
Yeah. And it's that the brave, and there's a real braveness in everything here and everything you do, but you're kind of leaving these kind of vulnerable places open, and a lot of things have this, as you say, this flux, this unformed quality, or this kind of, this, you've talked about kind of almost the wild quality of the language, a kind of untamable quality. Yeah. And something that I find fascinating as well is you've talked about how chopping something up changes its value.
It does.
So this is where the object, and we've got a lot of found objects also incorporated here, perfume bottles, we've got the shoe here, we've got we've got all sorts of different items placed around, and there's a kind of dialogue going on between different kinds of objects, which expands the definition of fashion in a lot of ways, I think.
It does.
But also is about you bringing in autobiographical and fictional narratives through these objects, and through changing the value of these items in the way that they kind of work together in a dialogue.
I think so. Well, I hope so. I mean, I don't know how connected I am to that, but maybe other people that look at it might be, if you know what I'm saying. You know, because I just think about the process of going through it. And for me, the idea of the perfume bottle as a kind of an object had a kind of an inherent nostalgia to it, in the sense that it reminded me of my aunt, reminded me of my mother, reminded me of being a child. Those very deep, heavy bass notes of, like, you know, Poison and Cinnabar. You know, those kind of really heavy perfumes of the 80s that defined femininity at the time. And it was all marketed then, you know, and ironically, it was marketed within the idea of fashion, which is kind of funny in a way. But I just found the bottles as objects, really beautiful things, and maybe things that people didn't want. And there's kind of, you know, I actually don't really remember writing a lot of it, because there is a kind of a loss in some of it. I ended up writing My Heart Belongs to the Broken Ones.
Which we can see on this.
And, you know, I think it was that thing that when Yvonne read it, is Yvonne here? I don't know, she is. Yeah, Yvonne. When Yvonne, you know, and, you know, the reaction, you know, it's the connection. And then it ends up, that starts a narrative, that starts a process of a new design, of a new idea, of a new thinking of something. But My Heart Belongs to the Broken Ones, I think it is thoughts on self, and thoughts on, you know, being that young girl in college in St. Martin's, being that young Irish girl, maybe, if we are allowed to say, do you know what I mean? That, like, just not knowing, like not knowing, and kind of, it was all self-initiated and just trying to figure all of that out.
In relation to that, you've got some of your text that you're going to read, which is Goldhawk Road Vintage, which is a text that kind of refers to some of that.
It does. I won't read all of it in case everybody falls asleep, but I'll read some of it. So, Goldhawk Road Vintage. There's a dress there that there's a print there, a small digital print on archival paper. Just there. That is the dress that I found in London on Tottenham Court Road, actually, which is ironic, where I went to college, and it was just absolutely decrepitly falling apart. And anyway, I brought it back to the studio, and so let me think, where will I start? Will I read the whole thing?
We're going to start at
I'm grateful. So I'm talking to possibly myself. I'm grateful for that gesture, where someone thought to actually keep it where it's hacked off sleeve, with its hacked off sleeve, and not throwing it out. No, this has value right here. I am so sure of it. Despite its amputee appearance of just one arm, where she perhaps attempted to amputate one sleeve, and I find myself so drawn into it. And then it's a bigger piece
And
of
there's,
kind of...
there's another kind of line that you've got a little bit further on about all of this is black and white.
Yeah. All of this is black and white, but wait, a lot of it is yellowed too. Now that I look closer, it's not white at all, and now I think that I love it even more. So that was the idea, that it had become, you know, with time, the colour had changed, and I've kind of addressed the like an ongoing relationship with the idea of uncolour colour. I've used a lot of non-colour tones, but there's a lot of colour within those non-colour tones, and I think it's again, I think it's a nostalgic relationship with colour that reminds me of, say, my mother. You know, the tones of beiges that she might have worn. So there is colour, but it's just not jumping at us.
And for you, in those kinds of seeking moments, and you know, this very visceral and powerful image of a garment that's had its sleeve hacked off, there's something. These are objects that carry memories, but they also carry lives, and these are kind of fictional lives potentially, but they're real lives too.
Yeah, and it's hard to know sometimes, you know, even when you're writing what's fictional and what's, you know, it all merges. Well, for me, it merges anyway.
And there's something you've used this word, and I think you use it in this text as well at different points, but gestural. There's something about gesture in this. Could you talk a little bit more about?
I don't know. Can I? Let me think.
Yeah.
Gestural feels like a relationship with something. It feels like an intention. And something bigger that you need to get at. Obviously, a gesture to somebody, we know what that means. But the idea of, for me, the gesture is getting at something.
Yeah.
Would I be right? I mean, I don't know what.
It's sort of interesting because I feel like with the way you've talked about gesture feels like, and this is why it connects to the writing you just read there, is that kind of stains on garments are a kind of gesture, stitches in clothing. It's kind of how memories are held and then presented through these garments, through these objects. And in a way, it's almost as if those gestures of these kind of stories, which are, kind of gesturing out towards us, gesturing to lives in the past, in a way, they seem to kind of elevate the objects for you. Would you agree?
I think kind of... elevation is, isn't it? It's personal. Yeah, elevation would be a good word of looking at it. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So we also had this idea that you've kind of talked about a little bit, which is there's the presence of these kind of almost ghosts and guides, different. I mean, this is a room full of women, really, layered up through all of these garments, all of these stories, through the life that the garments and the objects bring, and through the lives, your life and the people that you've known. And I just wanted to read a little bit of text that I love that you've written, which is, "A parade of ghosts accompanied me on my search. All of the women that once wore these garments, perhaps not yet dead. How will I ever know? Like a procession of creative possibilities, they exhaust and attract me. They dress me, educate me, guide me, question me." And it's almost like you are unlocking something through these garments, through these objects, and through the process that you go through in spending time with them in the studio. And you've mentioned this time, spending time through writing about them. And that, to me, that's research.
It is, and it's process. And I think it's at the passage of time. It's definitely it's that long period of, as I said, the not knowing, and in the context of making any kind of work, the not knowing, and the voices in our heads, the things that we carry with us, those reactions, those kind of gestures from people, anything that I picked up on, that I could like unpick, that would help to continue. I mean, it might sound kind of funny, but just the trying to make a pathway into something is part of the process, and I feel like tonight, that this is possibly reconciliation with the past, and hopefully open up new conversations of making other types of work.
And reconciling the different areas of your practices.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And also, it's just I like doing it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
as simple as, you know.
Yeah. And so in this kind of process of examining and investigating, when you're looking into a garment, looking into an object, we've got another story, which is Carol Craig, that you're going to read a little bit from.
If I can find it. My notes. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is, again, a much bigger piece, and I haven't really figured out what to do with a lot of these pieces. They just come and the energy comes in, and then you write them and they are, but they're beginning to connect. So with this, I'm again looking. I'm in London. I take a dress back to the studio, and I'm writing about it. To think that I can't find it now when looking for a thick cotton thread of similar quality, or a saddle stitch even. People ask, what is that, a saddle stitch? Because many have forgotten. Fused inside in calico, it was cut on a wooden table. No iron on fusing here, mind you. My eyes up to the label now, Carol Craig, in elaborate gold thread merging into yellow. My eyes gladdened by this yellow font and all of its metallics on the back of the label itself when I turn it over, which is what I do, of course, playing the thin metal threads like a harpist, racing tones of golds and yellow, playing into each other's flicker and into mine. And I am enjoying this all over. This hand stitching here inside and everywhere it's seeping. And again, yeah, that's part of a bigger piece. It was kind of looking and searching, which, you know, we've an image here of the purple woman just behind Ed here.
She's tiny. She's tiny. We can, if everyone
so, like,
can
you
see
know,
her
it kind of feels like she is from a sketchbook from 2001, and I love the way the wall feels a bit like a sketchbook, because I'm always thinking about the white spaces in the sketchbook, the areas that are left unfilled and how important they are. But it was lovely that, you know, David curated the show with me and just did phenomenal, fantastic. I'm so moved by everything. But she's there. She's from 2001, and I took a photograph of her in, I think it was Linate Airport in 2001, and, you know, obviously I have a picture of the front of her as well, but, you know, she's some woman that I don't know. But I found myself kind of, as I said again, looking and documenting, and, you know, my eye just constantly kind of looking. And with her, she I think, you know, she wouldn't have been very kind of well presented in herself, you know. She had like a purple suit on, holes in her tights and things like that. She was in the airport, and there's something about being in airports, you know, those liminal spaces where your brain just, you see things in a different way.
Absolutely.
So I then found that, again, I've kind of carried her along. So she feels like the kind of linchpin, or let's just say the opening up, the opening up of, I don't want to reduce it to an aesthetic, because you can't really reduce a person to an aesthetic, but in a sense, there's a lot of women like that a lot of the titles are, I think of her. So there's a lot of hers, plural, you know, the women that maybe that are you know, that I'm thinking of.
That you're designing for, that you are also remembering
maybe, yeah, they're kind of coming through in some way, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love in the text that you just read, the Carol Craig text, it gives us a real insight into your kind of making process and that place in the studio. You looking at the thread, you thinking about the stitches, you examine this, again, this idea of kind of ferociously looking. But we've also talked a bit, and, you know, there is a high level of kind of, as we said, sort of vulnerability in this show, and kind of an unpacking. And you've talked about ideas of loss and letting go.
Yeah.
And I think, and in that, it'd be good to touch upon these ideas of discomfort in the process.
Yeah.
Like, are you often in a kind of
Well, yeah, I think
discomfort?
I think, I mean, it's. I think definitely making anything, there's a huge level of it. I mean, is discomfort the word? Possibly. I think, yeah. I mean, there's moments of real elation and joy. Yeah. But, you know, on a level. Yeah. There's definitely an element of that, but it's something that I suppose I'm kind of familiar with, in a sense. I'm working through it. Through it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You know. that, and hopefully I'll change that narrative soon. I'll flip that whole thing,
Yeah.
and that will change.
So thinking about working through it, would you see this exhibition as kind of work in progress? Are we seeing something? You used
Definitely
the word flux at
here,
the beginning.
This is all resolved.
Right.
It's for me. I'm you know, I'm not asking any more questions here. I'm not exploring anything. I don't feel like I need to have a conversation or with it, you know, about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this kind of way in which fashion is kind of cultural, sociological, it's material, it's about storytelling. Do you feel that your work here is kind of questioning some of the definitions of fashion, or are you questioning, you know, how is this kind of related?
I'm revisiting earlier, I'm revisiting that girl in Limerick in 1997, 98 in the library. There were, you know, no internet, and finding that book on Martin Margiela, and just, as I said, you know, and that trying to, the kind of pureness of that and the rawness of that, my heart is always with that, you know, and I always refer back to it. So this has allowed me to kind of revisit that, reopen that, if you know what I mean. And where that goes, I don't know. I mean, you know, I don't know. I'd like to think that it will develop into something else. But the nature of the work is that, you know, when you have something, you can do a lot of things with it. You know, you can photograph it.
Yes.
You know, you can. There's so many other mediums of expressing something.
Yes.
And I love that idea. You talked about the intersection. Of disciplines, you know.
Yeah. In relation to that, we talked quite a lot about the garments, and we've got this amazing stitching and the kind of replicas and found objects. Could you tell us a little bit about these incredible high definition scans?
Yeah. Well, you know, they're really assemblages, and they're very just instinctual, completely. I mean, obviously, you know, I personally chose the objects, and I really wanted to do that. They're not photographs, but they're large-scale scans. So I placed them down on a huge scanner, basically, and I made like 196 of them or something like that, and narrowed it back to this and the green at the end, and the green at the end. That piece there, I particularly loved that kind of idea of this very difficult kind of challenging kind of tone that I don't get to work with that often, and that kind of like from a material kind of point of view, the fabrication and things like that. And I ended up looking at the designer that actually designed it, who's now passed away. It's called "Is This What Sustains Me?" And again, that's the questioning: is this what sustains me? You know, it's yeah.
I love that. Yes. Oh, there's so many of your phrases that just like this, the deep hem devotion, which is one of my favourites. So I think we're gonna move on to asking if anyone wants any questions in a moment, but we just had one more. There was a kind of final piece of text that you wanted to visit, which is called
I'll keep it really quick.
Daughter and Me.
Yeah, so this one is Daughter and Me looking for what she couldn't remember. And it was us in London, and we were looking at garments and things like that. But I'll just read two lines from it, and I'm plucking lines out of paragraphs. So forgive me if you're thinking, where did this come from? I do go looking for their kind, and certainly this is what I needed to find: someone else's story, another life I will never know of. But that icy blue was just hanging there on that rail, all thin, almost unimportant, and I couldn't leave it behind. I came looking for it, as I said, and here it is now, sandwiched between layers of random clothes. This blue resonates through me like the kind of blue I can't describe and don't really want to. Like an icy ice cream, maybe, like porcelain blue, a drawn hospital curtain, like nativity blue, blue of glaze, a virgin's mantle, with all the blue tipping. That is from one paragraph, and then there's just one line. For it's this very thing that I want right now, these very old things, this slip, its shape, its non-shape really, and they are out there, for it's this very thing, and it just kind of, I won't keep going.
But it's beautiful. Yeah. And it's so embodied, and it's it's just incredibly evocative. And I think the thing about this exhibition that's just so thrilling is this ongoing interplay between your beautiful writing, the garments, the materiality, and just really encourage everybody to absorb the texts alongside looking at the objects and images. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca.
And I think, does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? Open up. It's always tricky to be the first asking a question, but anyone burning with anything? If not?
Is there liquid for this heat?
That's a good question.
Say it again?
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
Okay. So you had a few thank yous.
Yeah, I'd like to just very quickly thank. I'd like to thank so many people. Let me think. Where do I start? I'd like to thank David for working with me on producing the show from DP3, David Poole. I'd like to thank Annie Ryan. I'd like to thank Yvonne over there. Thank you, Yvonne. I'd like to thank Margaret Heffernan, who isn't here. I'd like Sharon McMahon, the team at Dunn's. Who else have I forgotten? I hope I haven't.
It's always tricky when you're on the spot, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julie Feeney for buying me the first notepad to write with 15 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and for signing it. That's it. There's so many people, but that's
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much for sharing
Thanks.
your thoughts, Joanne, and thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Oh my God, oh my God, such a long